We're here with the director of the Ronald Reagan Institute in Washington, D.C., Roger Zakheim. Man, oh man, this survey you folks did and put out is really quite impressive. Tell us about this survey.
Well, thanks, Mark, and grateful for the opportunity to chat about the survey. We've been doing this survey where we get the views of the American people on foreign policy, national security, and defense issues since 2018. We think it's the deepest dive into the views of the American people on these subjects, meaning nobody else is really doing this as consistent as we are, kind of covering the range of issues. And we put this in the field in the end of May and wrapped it up on June 2nd. Goes out to over 1,000 people, asking them, in particular, this issue that you've been leading on in terms of what their views are on Iran's nuclear weapons program, and what their views would be if Israel were carried out a strike. Of course, we asked these questions prior to the events 6 plus days ago. And it turns out, Mark, that the American people are very concerned about Iran's nuclear weapons program, and that they'd be supportive of Israel striking that program. And that was all before the events of 6 days ago.
84%, that's a big number. You can't get 84% to agree on anything, can you, Roger?
That's certainly not in our political domain. And yeah, we asked, we said, hey, what sort of issue concerns you most when it comes to your security and prosperity? What matters to you? And preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, as you just referenced, it came out 84% of Americans say that matters to their security, outperforming Russia and Ukraine, or China and Taiwan. Now, Americans are quite concerned about both of those, coming to about 75% and 73% respectively. But nothing else is as close in the mind of the Americans, or what matters to them more than how do we prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. And so as President Trump sits with this decision now in terms of what, if any, U.S. role will be in completing the work of Israel, he stands on not just solid footing, but overwhelming support from the American people on this issue because they care about it. It matters to the American people, and clearly it matters to President Trump.
Do you see some similarities? I do, with Reagan and Trump, peace through strength, make America great again. Both of them wanted to avoid wars. I mean, Reagan defeated the Soviet Union without any direct confrontation whatsoever, and yet he built up the military. They knew he meant business. He took out most of the Iranian Navy at one point. There were other things we did. Bombed Gaddafi's palace when he was, he wasn't there, but he got the message. After that, he was back in his box and he gave up his nukes. And I could go on and on and on. And in other words, Reagan wasn't a quote-unquote warmonger, but he was a powerful commander-in-chief, a prudential commander-in-chief. And again, this whole idea of peace through strength was his, no?
Absolutely. President Trump is the first president since President Reagan to run on a peace through strength platform. Powerful and prudential, I think, would describe President Reagan's approach to being commander-in-chief and what he did during his 8 years in office. And yes, President Trump is looking to do the same and has done the same, certainly as it relates to Iran with the Soleimani strike in his first term. And, this idea of peace was, of course, top of mind and essential because of what President Reagan sought to achieve in his time in office. And we're seeing that now as a defining sort of framework in which President Trump is approaching certainly the second term. But it's the kind of peace, the nature of the peace is really what the debate's about. And it's one that's backed by strength and is a meaningful peace, a lasting peace that actually makes Americans safer, not the sort of false peace that would allow Iran, in this case, to maintain a nuclear weapons program. That is not the piece that makes us more secure. And that's really what this debate is about. And of course, President Reagan led on that debate during his time in office as it relates to the Cold War. I mean, it was essential for Americans to understand that we had to have a true peace with the Soviet Union. That was actually we winning and the Soviets losing. And that was President Reagan's approach.
Roger, I look at this today. You step back and kind of push away all the static and just use your own noggin. You're talking about 84%. That tells me there really isn't a great debate in the Republican Party or even in the country. With the Democrats, there is. I mean, they are isolationists. They hate Israel. They undermine our own country. This is just my opinion. And the so-called isolationists, you realize what a small percentage of the population they really represent, whether it is sort of the extremists on one end or the extremists or the other. And the extremists on both ends, as you know, they call this the shoe horse effect. They really are in agreement on foreign policy, which isn't much of a foreign policy, where the rest of the nation does not agree with them. Your figure's 84%. CNN came within something like this, about 80%. That's the number. 8 out of 10, 8.5 out of 10 Americans. That is a big deal. So I think the American people are not divided on this. I don't think the Republican Party is divided on this. I think there's some elements who claim there's division on this, want there to be division on this. What do you think of that?
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, there's this isolationist pocket that has outsized influence and makes a lot more noise than it truly is in terms of the percentage representation of the Republican Party. President Trump, made clear that he's the one who defines what MAGA is and what it's not. What this survey shows is where the American people are. And, you mentioned the 84%. So that's bipartisan, support for this, overwhelming. You can't get those numbers anywhere. When it comes to those who are Republicans, so respondents to the survey, who are President Trump's voters, it's approaching 90%. I mean,
hold on now.
Get that?
That's a big number there. So almost 90% of Republicans want these nuclear weapons taken out. And Trump and they, of course, are simpatico on this.
President Trump is advancing something that his voters overwhelmingly care about. It matters to them to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. It's really not a debate within the Republican Party.
Roger, we got to have you back more often. If people want to learn more about the Ronald Reagan Institute in Washington, D.C., where do they go?
You go to the ReaganInstitute.org, and you'll see the survey right up there.
ReaganInstitute.org. You want to study the survey yourself, folks? ReaganInstitute.org. God bless, brother.